Hey guys, in this week's book, we looked at James Roderick Sharp's American Politics in the Early Republic, The New Nation in Crisis. And the quote that we are looking at this week is looking at how the periods between 1789 to 1801 were representative of a critical era in American history, that this period was a highly sought after examination of the political, social, and or even economic implications of what I guess kind of direction the American society and American democracy would go in, and he even compares it to the time frame of the Civil War. And I think starting off, I want to talk about how coming off the American Revolution, no, I mean, like he said, no one really knew what the verdict of this era was. You don't. There were many people that were hesitant of still being in this democratic body. That people were still not as receptive in the beginning of a democratic or republican idea of moving away from this monarchy type system. And you see that people were concerned of the anti-federalist and this trust in Washington, George Washington and his representatives in Congress. And you also even see this fear that some people thought that the government was too large and too difficult to fit the needs of every citizen. And I think that's not wrong on their behalf, but and there's it's not wrong to ask questions about if there is a validity of these founding men and these political figures being prime examples to fit the needs of everybody. And a quote on page 19, it talks about how the United States was similar to those societies described by one social scientist, were local loyalties to the more primordial social and economic groupings: family, clan, village, tribe, religion, social class, complete with and often supersede loyalty to the broader institutions of public authority. And I think that's really receptive of, I think, incorporating the two early American political parties, of that of the Federalists and Republicans. And you see that in certain ideological beliefs, that the Federalists were more centered on this founding of the nation, this constitutional well-being, and the Republicans were somewhat similar to that, but they were seen as being more loyal to localist issues. And you see these different ideas of incorporating how the levels of government should work, where the Republicans were on page 10, the Republicans were referred to their Federalist, the Republicans often referred to their Federalist opponents as Tories, believing them to be not loyal through rival political group, but individuals who hope to subvert the Constitution and reestablish a special relationship with Great Britain. And looking on the other side, where the Republicans were criticized by the Federalists as being more localized again. They felt that they had sympathy towards France, and they were selfish localists whose loyalties to their individual states were greater than their loyalty to the Union. And that's these differing political systems, especially between that pivotal period that he's talking about between 1789 and 1801, readdress that there was two competing factions within the American system, that people started to associate themselves with one party or the other. And I think that that people wanting to go from one view or the other is very representative of a democracy. And then it shows to me that a democracy can work, that although there are issues with mobs even coming up, and these political factions starting to become radicalized on a lot of elections between, for instance, the election of 1800 or the other elections between this time period, you see people becoming very politicized and becoming radical and very excited in a sense of believing that one person or one party rather should be in office. And I think that is similar to what happened during the Civil War. You see that certain groups are very emotionally charged towards one stance on an issue over the other. And I think you see that in this book, that he argued that there's going to be groups of people on the Federalist and Republican side that they were very emotionally charged in wanting to make sure that one party stayed in office over the other. And that's where you get these mob riots and these political factions coming from the Federalist side. I think it was Federalists that were started to form groups that were very riot based. They wanted to become politically active, but in a very public sense, that they wanted to get their voices heard. And so I think that reaffirms this issue that although there are many political differences, that at the end of the day, it shows that the citizens and the delegates and these representatives were wanting to form a democracy and to make sure that this civic loyalty was a strong proponent of early American politics. And I think the fundamental stance that this book talks about was how imbalanced the early American system was. And I think I agree with his assessment of this book, in that that the American system was not as put together as I would have thought. And I don't know if anybody else thought those things, but I think this book changed my perspective of how I thought before that the American system was very strongly established. And it clearly wasn't in this book, that there was on many levels, coming from the local level to the individual stance on issues, and going all the way up to Washington. You see that there were very strong political differences, very strong social stances on different things. And you see that when the introduction of the Alien and Sedition Acts, these other acts coming up, that people really were voicing their opinions on how a government should be run, and especially in this way, that a democracy should be run on everybody's input into a situation, rather than a monarchy type of government where there was no voicing of opinions. And so I think his book really shaped how there was no true verdict being set by the time of even 1800, that there was a lot of work that the government had to do on a level that reciprocated with sharing of the same beliefs with its American people. I think that at this point there was still a somewhat of a disconnect between people still being trustworthy of the government. I think there was a lot of loyalty coming from people because of being so infatuated in one party over the other, but there was still, I think, he kind of leaves it off as like there was still a lot of growth to happen on the part of the American people and also on the representatives that were in the government, and wanted to stay there, but there was still a need to kind of question where does that the government lead off from here. And I think you'll see in a couple years later that during the Civil War you see the same things, but it was in a more radicalized that things didn't get that as far as it was during the 1790s. And I think on the part that people just didn't want to see a new system fail. And I think that's where you see his book address that there, yes, there was concerns about making a strong government, but at the end of the day, people were still loyal to this government. And so I look forward to everybody else's post this week, and that's all.